Welcome everybody to Standards Committee, and both online and in the room. My name is John Bailey. I'm chair of the committee, and I will ask in a few moments for the members around the room to introduce themselves. I'll go through a few fire drill associated elements, if you like. There isn't a fire drill expected today, so if there is an alarm goes off, follow Scott. The agenda and papers have been published on the Council's website in advance of the meeting. Could I kindly request that members and officers refer to the page numbers from the agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Today's meeting we run a hybrid format with committee members and key officers physically present in County Hall. Other elected members and officers may physically and remotely join the meeting to speak on specific agenda items or observe. The Council will be making a recording of the meeting to assist with the recording of our discussions. Please only speak at the chair's invitation. Switch on your microphone, particularly so that people out of the room can hear what you have to say. And turn off microphones and cameras when not speaking. Okay. Apologies for absence. Steve.
Yes, Chairman, apologies from Councillor Martin Timmery, who's hoping to join online, and Paul Hooper, who has joined online. And also apologies received from Philip Knowles, one of the independent persons. He was hoping to come to the meeting.
Thank you, Steve. Right, declarations of interest. Any other declarations that aren't already declared? Thank you. Public question time, item 3. 2 people are registered to speak. They'll have up to 3 minutes each, and their questions have been already circulated to the committee. Jenny Kenton, would you like to speak first? I think you're speaking as a member of the public, Jenny. Yeah. Actually.
John, I'm sorry to butt in, but we're not hearing a word. We haven't heard Jenny, we haven't heard anything.
John, can you stick your thumb up if you can hear us? Okay, so you're aware that no one online has heard a word of what I could see Scott's lips moving, but more than that, nobody could hear anything. Heard your very clear introduction and got to the bit where you said there were public questions, but more than that, nothing.
It's the same for me.
Got you back. Well. Now I can hear you.
Still nothing.
Further test. Can everybody hear us online?
Ah, hooray!
There we go.
Yes, thanks, Scott.
Chair.
I'll ask Jenny to. Well, I'll ask her to, because then it'll be. Okay, thank you, everybody, for bearing with that, and hopefully you can all hear the proceedings now. Yes, I've got somebody saying my dulcet tones are now apparent. If anybody can't hear, well, can you ask them to send a chat then? Yeah. I've got one from Martin saying he can hear, and one from Simon Cole. Okay, hopefully you're all on board from the chat that we've had through. Thank you very much for bearing with us while we deal with the vagaries of modern technology. We got to the position where I was asking I moved on to public questions rather, and I'm just going to ask Jenny Kenton to forbear with us and just read through her questions again, because I think that just prior to that, we lost the line. So that'll make us join up. So Jenny, thank you. Welcome today, and over to you.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me now. I have 4 questions for the committee. Number 1 is, of the complaints listed in the report included in the agenda pack, how many have been dealt with by both a Somerset officer and an outside consultant? Number 2, how much has the council spent on outside consultants between February 2023 and October 2023 regarding work already undertaken by council staff? Question 3, what change has happened in the process to which code of conduct complaints are dealt with since the creation of the new council, as opposed to the county council's process? And question 4, how many complaints included in the report have waited 4 months or more to be completed?
Thank you, Jenny. I'll ask Scott to respond to you on those questions. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions. So again, just for everyone's context, you will be aware that agenda item 6 sets out a summary of code of conduct complaints since April of this year. So they're since the formation of Somerset Council. So in response to the questions, first question, none of the complaints listed in Appendix 1 have been dealt with by both a Somerset officer and an outside consultant. In terms of how much the council has spent on outside consultants, the council has spent, in terms of assessments and investigations, £2,750. In terms of changes to the process, again, I'd probably refer the committee and in terms of the question, back to the work of the committee back in July, I believe, when the committee made a series of recommendations, particularly around guidance and process for the new council. Much of that was predominantly in terms of improving the language of the guidance and including a flow chart to describe. So in terms of what's happened to the change of the process, I would say much more, it's more about improving how we provide more information to complainants and to subject members about the process itself, both visually and in writing. The other point in terms of how many complaints have waited 4 months or more to be completed, none of the complaints listed in Appendix 1 have waited 4 months or more to be completed.
Thank you, Scott. Would you like a written response as well, Jenny?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I can send you an email, both setting out the former, if you're asking about the former county council's process, I can send you what that was before April, And I can obviously send you the guidance and flow charts relating to the new council's complaints procedure. And obviously, I think probably following that, happy to talk through with you any specific points.
Thank you, Jenny. Our next question is from Councillor Jason Baker. Jason, would you like to put your questions forward, please?
Thank you. I have 4 questions. The first one is, when a code of conduct report is completed by the monitoring officer, who is informed of the outcome other than the councillors involved and the complainant? Second question is it normal practice for council members to be made aware of the outcome of the code of conduct complaint prior to those named in the complaint? Third question, are the outcomes of the code of conduct complaints confidential? And the fourth question, if any of the above have incorrectly taken place, what action can be taken and by whom?
Scott, would you like to respond, please?
Certainly, Chair. And again, thank you for the questions. In terms of the first question, I'd advise that in addition to the subject member and the complainants, the independent person who forms part of the assessment would also be engaged as part of the proposed outcome. And where the complaint relates to a city, town or parish councillor, then the clerk would also be informed as well in terms of the outcomes. In terms of the second question, is it normal practice for council members to be made aware? No, it isn't. In terms of the third question, are the outcomes of the code of conduct complaints confidential? If the complaint progresses to a formal investigation hearing, then the hearing would normally be held in public and the decision notice published on the council's website. But where there's no breaches found following a hearing, then the decision notice would only be published with the agreement of the subject councillor. So that's in respect of investigation and hearings. For those complaints that don't progress to a hearing, then an anonymous summary of complaints will be shared with members of the Standards Committee, and that's what we have on today's agenda in terms of agenda item 6. The outcome will be shared with the complainant, subject member, and if appropriate, if it relates to parish and town councils, then with the clerk. However, the council cannot control the information once it is shared with those parties. In terms of the final question, what I would say is, if you are aware of any evidence or if you have any concerns of breach of process, then please speak to the monitoring officer or one of the deputy monitoring officers, such as myself, and we will look into those inquiries.
Thank you. Is it possible to have those responses in email to me as well, please? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jason. Just to reiterate on Scott's point about happy to have an informal discussion with you, I'd be happy to be part of that as well if that was felt to be useful to you both. Because I think we are at the start of a process here, and it'd be useful to learn whatever we can as we go through the feedback. So thank you for coming along today anyway, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. By all means, thank you very much. Okay, I just realised with all the changes in the connections, I'll just hold on for a minute, Hugh, if I may. Just get everybody to introduce themselves for the people who are not in this room. I'll introduce Paul Hooper, who's a co-opted member who's outside of the room, online at the moment. Otherwise, perhaps we could start with Francis. Would you like to start?
This committee. Oh, sorry. I can start again. Francis Nicholson, member for Dalverton and Exmoor, and a member of this committee.
Hugh Davis. My area is part of West Somerset, Williton, Watchet, then on to Guernsey, Hickley Point, etc.
Thank you.
Sandy Chair, Scott Waldridge, Deputy Monitoring Officer.
I'm Brian Smedley, Councillor for Bridgewater South and Vice Chair of this group.
Steve Taylor, Committee Manager.
Alan Hemsley, co-opted member. David Strip, co-opted member.
And Robin Horton, co-opted member.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think that's all of the members of the committee introduced, so hopefully you now know who we are. So moving on to item 4. The minutes. Everybody's had a copy of the minutes. Do they recognise as a fair reflection of the meeting? Perhaps I'll take a hands on that if you could. Do us a favour. All right, thank you. Steve? Okay, those of you who, sorry, Hugh, I forgot you.
Chair, it's on the very point that you just signed the minutes. Why I didn't vote then is because I wasn't here. And I note that my apologies weren't given, but I thought I did give them to somebody. But I won't name them in case I didn't. It's rather embarrassing. Yeah, but I'm sure I did give them.
Can we all informally accept your apologies, Hugh, and not change the minutes if you're happy with that? There's no penalties being levied here at all. But I do have some biscuits here, so perhaps they could go around to my right. And I think Paul's doing the biscuits next time. Okay, do you remember that we've been working through an action plan as we've gone through the meeting? So I'd like to, that's behind me. I'll keep that up to date as we go. I think, Steve, you're recording it. I'll pop round a photo of it anyway when we've finished, so you all know what we've agreed to do. And we'll run through the last action plan to see what's come out of that. Okay, if you've all got a copy of it in front of you, the first action is to review the committee and subcommittee membership. That's down to, for those outside the room, we have three groups called P1, P2 and P3, which means priority 1, 2 and 3. The misnomer, if it's a priority, you can only have one. But there we are. So they've been looking at various elements, and the P2 means that they have done that particular first action, but it's not due until the 27th of March, so that one's held over. Second action was for the Model Code of Conduct adoption by city, town and parish councils to undertake an online survey. That's actually on the agenda, so we'll come to that, and that was for the monitoring officer and well, Andrew at the time, wasn't it? So we'll come back to that. The Officer Code of Conduct was element 3, and perhaps we could do a quick update on that now. The Service Director was due to share this is the Officer Code of Conduct with the union reps and update the committee. That was for today. Have we got an update on that at all, Scott? I know we've had some.
Only that, I mean, my only update is that process is still underway, has not yet been completed, which is why it's not on your agenda today.
Okay, what sort of timescale have we got anybody in post now that would be able to take that forward?
We do now have an interim service director of workforce, so yes, we're raising it with them.
Would it be possible to bring that before our next meeting, which is not till January? Is that a realistic timescale, do you think?
I'd hope so, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I could certainly alert yourselves outside of the meeting if that's not, but yeah, I'd certainly hope that should be a date that could be met.
Next item on the action plan was the organisational chart. An organisational chart for democratic service was requested. Have we had that?
Again, Chair, I think all members will know. I know I provided an update to all 110 members in terms of key contacts in DEM services for the various functions. So I'd probably suggest that that action's principally dealt with by then. Hopefully you'll appreciate that along with many services, we are looking at the structure of democratic services over the coming months. So I'd probably encourage all members again in the interim, certainly to make use of those contacts. And if you're unsure of anything, by all means, come straight to myself as an initial point of contact.
Thank you, Scott. I think we have a moving situation as people adopt different roles and new roles. So I think that's as fair as we can probably expect at the moment. But if we're not sure, largely the people are in the room, either side of me, not Brian, sorry, Scott and Steve, and go to one of those, or Scott, particularly if you're not sure where to go to for anything. So we don't want things to slow up or fall through the cracks. Okay, on to action 5, which is the code of conduct complaints, and this is due to be finally reviewed on the 27th of March meeting 2024. The complaint figures with costings, and that's on the agenda for us to look at later on. So I'll come back to that then. Item 6 was gifts and hospitality, and that's again on the agenda to come forward later on. So that appears to have covered all the elements in the action plan. So was that a fair reflection? I haven't missed anything of it. Thank you.
Yeah, the numbers you've given out are completely different to my agenda. The gifts and hospitality are 5 here, it says, and the code of conduct complaints is 6, and you've given them out the opposite way around. So
yeah, we've got.
Am I right or wrong?
It's the action plan I've been working through, Hugh, which has got different numbers. But you're right, item 5.
Yeah.
For the action plan, it was numbered 6.
Yeah.
For last time.
It's complicated to have the minutes before the action plan before the minutes, because what I think he's been looking at, which is what I was looking at, is the action plan in the minutes because it came after the minutes. Whereas, you know.
Okay, well, I'll produce the document and waive it so that everybody knows which one we're looking at. So the minutes, okay. So everybody happy with the action plans being covered? There's nothing we've missed out. Thank you. Review of gifts and hospitality. I'd like to refer to the P3 group to just take us through their suggestions and recommendations. Is that somebody who'd like to do that?
Chair, does Martin want to deal with this first, please?
Martin, would you like to take us through the recommendations that you've made? Or
I haven't got them in front. Is it me you're talking to?
Yeah.
I haven't got them in front of me. I'm sorry.
Would you like to delegate one of your group to do it for you?
Yes. Well, I don't know who wants to take it on.
Alan, would you like to take that on? Alan will take it for you.
Yeah, I mean, Alan was very, constructive in arranging this. So as much as I realise I'm chair of the group, he was the driving force.
Thank you, Martin. That's very glowing credentials there. Thank you. Over to Alan.
I think I climbed under the table at that point. Thank you, Martin. Yes, you've got on page 9 of your agenda papers, 9, 10, 11, right through to 14, you've got our report. We did look at the officers level, and that's £25. Currently members are 50. We looked at that. We also looked at whether we should bring it down to 5 or to 10. Sorry, it's page 17 to 22 in your agenda papers of the original pack, but I've got it as there was a separate report come out after the main agenda pack, which I hope you've seen, because I'll go through. Let me go through 17 to 20. There was a supplement,
which everybody had.
A report from Scott. So that's a separate item that came round later.
Would you like to clarify the differences in that supplementary pack?
The supplementary pack includes a report from Scott, but it also does a revised Appendix 2 form. the revisions on the Appendix 2 form, if I can go through those with you, which would be on page 21 of your original agenda pack, or page 13 of the supplementary pack. The changes are at the top of the form, Gifts Hospitality over the value of, the original form had £50, but obviously the working group is suggesting £10. And also give notice, that should be 10 instead of 50. But further down that page, under box B, there looks to be nothing after box B until you come to item D on the form. There should be a heading at C, nature of gifts or hospitality offered, should go in there. On your supplementary pack, that's on page 13. Basically, we've looked at it. We are minded to suggest £10 as the limit. I say we did look at the officers' £25 and whether we should align the two. But also we were minded to amend the form, because you will recall at the last meeting, we did raise questions with Andrew Mellerish about whether those offers of hospitality, etc., had been accepted, and that wasn't clear on that report. Partly because the form doesn't specifically say you've got to tick this box or tick that box, whether you're accepting or rejecting the offer of gifts or hospitality. The amended form does at part D, I have accepted the offer, I have rejected the offer, and it's quite plain, you tick one box only. So you have to declare whether you've accepted or rejected the offer. Apart from that, Chairman, I think it's fairly straightforward. So I think you need to consider two items. Firstly, the level at which you need to declare a gift or hospitality. Bearing in mind the Constitution says you should refuse everything. The Constitution says you should refuse everything unless to do so is rude. And then the other thing you need to consider is the actual register form. I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So looking at the report recommendations, the items that are laid out hopefully in the correct document you've got in front of you are to, firstly, to consider and review the recommendations for priority group 3 set out in Appendix 1, together with the context of the current requirements set out in this report, and decide whether or not to request full council amend the current level requirements at which members declare their acceptance or refusal of gifts and hospitality. I'll take that one first, but I'll just remind you of the second one, which is to consider if any changes are required to the gifts and hospitality form set out in Appendix 2. So I've just reiterated what was on. Thank you, Steve. Just reiterated what Alan's just covered there, and I will then go around the room and pick up any thoughts on one first. I've got Paul up first, I think.
I was going to say reducing the level. I know the last time I was involved with discussions with this several months ago, I was proposing that the limit be raised to £100, not reduced. We need to be pretty sure with what life is like these days. And I think, normal business practice, charity practice, everything, I would say £100 was a more realistic level. And can I just ask Scott, what is the reason for saying you've rejected an offer? If you don't accept it, it doesn't come under discussion. Why is there that there?
Scott, would you like to respond to that? I'm not sure that's your brief or whether it comes from Alan on behalf of the committee.
I can't hear you, Scott.
So, yeah, in terms of the reasons one, again, I think that's purely in terms of transparency. That's a recommendation from the priority group as part of looking at the current form and seeking to help improve transparency for instances where members either accept, but also where they reject
Thank you, Scott. I've got, I'll take Alan first, then David, and then Tessa's online. Scott, sorry, you were before Tessa. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, Constitution paragraph 9.6, I register with the monitoring officer any gift or hospitality with an estimated value of at least £50 that I have been offered but have refused to accept within 28 days of the offer. Therefore, every offer of hospitality or gifts has to be registered.
Okay.
Is that clarified for you, Paul?
Yeah, it just seems rather archaic if nothing is happening. That's all.
Yes, we're working within a framework that we're given. I think that's the process, but we may need to bring back in the future things that we'd like to change at that point, I think. Thank you, Alan. David, next.
A couple of things. First of all, I think a point that Tessa made quite strongly was that as well as gifts and hospitality, we're looking at benefits as well. So a benefit can be something other than a gift or hospitality. I think this, for me, the level, whether it's £5 or £10, is it's about the right level, bearing in mind the level of inflation at the moment. I think probably we start with £10 and worry about that. But for me, there was a bit of confusion because as a parish councillor, I was offered a gift that was probably worth about 150 quid. And actually it would have put me and could have put me in a very difficult position. And so obviously I turned it down. It was actually offered to me, you know, as a friend rather than a councillor, but it would have put me in a difficult position. So then looking through the parish council code of conduct, so the piece about gifts and hospitality, which is 9.6 as in the councillor thing, which is I register with the monitoring officer any gift or hospitality with an estimated value of at least £50 that I've been offered but have been refused. Actually, that isn't in the, that's been taken out of the parish councillor's version of the code of conduct, and I wonder why there's that confusion. And the other thing is that on the register of members' interest, which parish councillors have to complete, the limit there is £25. So it just seems, unless you say the officer's code of conduct says £25. So why are we, it just strikes me there should be some consistency, A, around the level, and B, around whether or not you have to record offers that have been refused. The other point that I was going to make, and I think I made in an email to you, was that when you look online on the council website, it does show under parish council members their registrations of interest. And actually, for the one for my parish, for Kingston St Mary, there are only 3 out of 5. No, there's only 1 out of 5 current members whose interests are registered, and there are also 2 for people that have long gone. So there's what I imagine is a big job there getting that up to date, but there's a bit of, there's sort of inconsistencies across the whole thing, and it just strikes me that if you're going to have a level and a code that dictates what levels and how and when you report them, then they should be consistent across the board.
Thank you, David. Scott, do you want to respond to that?
Certainly. I mean, I suppose for me, it probably draws on what is the paragraph 1.3 of the cover report, and apologies for its late issue. I think it's just useful context, and it's coming through as part of some of the contributions today. I think it's important just to root the basis of the current requirements. So the current requirements weren't designed by one of the legacy councils or by some of the former legacy councils. The current requirements set out in that members' code of conduct are drawn from the work of the local government association's model code of conduct. That model code was developed with over 300 English councils in terms of survey work and research. The gifts and hospitality level at £50 was recommended and set by the local government association. So that's a value and a threshold that they're saying, we believe all English councils should set a threshold level of £50. So along with many other councils, Somerset Council adopted that as the context to its requirements, along with the Model Code of Conduct. So I just think that the questions around where was the value set and what reference was given, that was all driven by the work of the local government association. And you'll find if you look at many other council constitutions, many other councils will have exactly those provisions and that level because of that.
So to reflect on what Scott's just said, we've worked with the LGA model. It won't have been adopted by all parish councils, like a lot of the stuff that we're trying to get promulgated out there. So they will have various different ways of looking at that. We would like that to be consistent, but it isn't at the moment. Is that a reflection, fair reflection of my understanding, Scott?
In terms of the position of the parish and town councils, yes, but in terms of what I would say as upper tier and principal councils, the vast majority of those have adopted that LGA model code. And I would say the vast majority are operating on the basis of that figure of £50. That doesn't mean that individual councils can't set their own threshold, but I'm just saying in terms of context, that's where the £50 came from. It came from the work of the local government association.
Back on that particular point, otherwise I'll move around to the others.
No, just to say that, you know, as a parish councillor, we have adopted the, you know, the LGA, what we understand to be the LGA version, which I imagine was exactly the same as the one for councillors. But it seems that clause 9.6, which says you have to record offers that are declined, isn't in the parish council version. So, you know, is there a difference there? How come, you know, we didn't go through the LGA code of conduct as a parish council and strike that out. You know, that was what we received as a parish council, but that is different from the Somerset Council's one. The point I was making.
Can I suggest that's something we take on as an individual case in your situation, but also when we're looking at the adoption by parish councils around the area, and just check that in fact that what we think's happened is actually contemporaneous with what actually has happened. So as part of our work going forward, I think we need to just make sure that not just assume that it's got LGA on the top, so it's exactly the one we think it is. I'm aware that Scott, you were going to be next. Have you covered your points that you wanted to raise? Yeah. So over to Tessa, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. First thing I'd like to say is thank you to Priority Group 3 and the officers and the committee, and particularly to Steve Taylor. I apologise for not having written back to him specifically on this matter, but I did feel that I had probably rehearsed most of my arguments during the previous meeting of this committee, and I knew he'd be listening to the recording of that in the minutes, so to create the minutes. So thank you and apologies. The point I wanted to make has been made already, but I couldn't emphasize enough how important it is that we say, and we get into the habit of saying, gifts, benefits and hospitality, because that is the title for this, and benefits are completely different. If I was to take a taxi journey from Taunton Station to home, you know, or whatever, or to the council offices, it might well cost me, I don't know what, but it wouldn't quite be a gift, and it wouldn't necessarily be hospitality. And I think we need to be really clear that we're using a catch-all. I think the other point I would make, having raised this whole thing in the first place, I'm very happy with the new threshold suggested of £10. That sounds very reasonable. One of the points I would make, I'm going to ask you to refer, now I'm looking at page 11, item 10 on page 11 of the papers, but I am looking at that separate set of papers, and I might have to refer to or defer to Scott to give the correct committee paper page. But I'm looking at that about the business of members accepting or rejecting offers. And I wanted to ask for clarification on whether we have, under the LGA model, to define a reason for acceptance or rejection indeed. Because I think, you know, my preference would be to just say it's not appropriate, and whether that would suffice as a response. What I might not want to do is to put out the fact that I feel I might be compromised in future discussions should XYZ person or corporation decide to put in a planning application in my division or something. I don't know. You know, it's a catch-all. Whether we're going to get away, whether we'll be allowed to get away with saying in a catch-all, in that I just feel that it's not appropriate to accept an offer, a gift, hospitality or benefit, or whether it has to be more precise than that. And the other thing I just wanted to say is I think there is a difficulty, is there not, in that one can find oneself in a, let's say, a pizzeria, and somebody says, oh, I'll get these. And you say, no, I'll pay for my own. And does that constitute an offer? Because that might be a rather fierce interpretation of an offer. And I probably wouldn't consider that. I mean, and it might happen quite frequently. You might buy coffee and cake for somebody else as well as yourself and end up over the £10 threshold, or any threshold. You know, it could be anything. And somebody says, oh, I'll get these. And you say, no, it's all right, I'll do that. Does that constitute an offer? Those would be my comments. I'm particularly keen that we amend the form to say gifts, benefits and hospitality, and all the way through in every clause that it covers that. Thank you, Chair.
Tessa, contribute to the discussion, Hugh. And I've got 2 more comments from Alan and David. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm totally against any payment to anybody anytime. It's just nonsense saying we should put it in up to £10 or £20 or £50. We're there to do a job. And once you do it, whatever way you do it, you leave yourself open to the public. And now we've got Facebook and everything else. They wipe you out. So if you wish to take money, that's up to you, or even some other form of benefit. The only time I've been in this situation is sadly, my son passed away, and consequently, somebody came for a rifle license, and I said, sorry, he offered me a tenner or whatever. I said, no, I don't take anything. If you wish to, you can put it in my son's fund, which we had going. So that's the only time I've ever accepted it by that way. But there's no way I would accept. I'm here to serve the public. And if somebody is unhappy they didn't get planning permission, I'm on licensing.
Thank you. Come back to David. Scott. Thank you, Scott. And Martin. Oh, sorry, Alan then. Then I'll come back to Martin and to Scott. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think when we were considering this, it wasn't so much the amount. I think it was the matter of gifts in kind, in as much with the word that there was a mention of a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and that if you went to somebody's house to deal with something and they offered you a cup of tea, it would be probably acceptable to accept a cup of tea. And therefore, I think when we were considering this matter, we were looking at, you know, the relative value of that. I don't think anybody would ever suggest we should take anything in cash terms, but actually coming to a conclusion as to what something like a cup of tea would cost us. Sorry, I've got granddaughter around. Would cost it is very difficult to quantify.
Thank you, Martin. Scott.
Thank you, Jay. It was just on the reference to the word benefits. Again, most of the councils have a generic reference, which is gifts and hospitality. I'm not aware of any that inserts the phrase benefits. It doesn't mean that we can't. I think we just need to be very alive to then we'll have to define what do we mean by benefits and when is a gift and when is a benefit. I can't see it in the P3 group recommendations, you'll forgive me, in terms of a specific point. So again, just in terms of advising the committee, if this is something you want to consider anywhere, I think we just need to be alive to how we would then define the difference between a gift and a benefit.
Scott, anybody else in the room? I've got Tessa with her hand up again. Alan.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back on something David mentioned about the £150 you offered and you hadn't declared it? My thought on that, and I think the other members of P3 would agree, that if that is a one-off to you alone, that's different. But if the company, let's say it's a company offering you and possibly two others of Kingston St Mary Parish Council the same gift without you each knowing that the other's been offered, they declare it and you don't, and the company turns around and says, we offered all three, that's going to look dodgy on your part. Sorry, I'm not using the correct local government phraseology, but to protect yourself, you do need to make that declaration that it was offered and you rejected it. Just that it doesn't come back on you later.
I was very happy to do that, and that was actually what I was looking to do, to declare it. Now, I haven't yet because I was waiting for this meeting. It was less than 28 days ago. But actually, what was offered were 3 tickets for Exeter Chiefs Rugby. And actually, 3 of us go to the rugby on a regular basis anyway. But one of them happens to be a councillor in Bridgewater. And actually, the person that was offering them as a friend, but he actually is an estate agent who is actually selling houses in Kingston St Mary. So, that whole thing didn't, looked horrible. But actually, what I'm saying then is that in terms of the code of conduct, our parish council version of the LGA code of conduct, the clause that says we have to record gifts offered and declined has been taken out. Now, so that's why I was waiting for this meeting to clarify whether as a parish councillor I should or I shouldn't be declaring gifts that are offered and declined. Because actually our code of conduct doesn't say we have to.
Okay, thank you, David. Although the code of conduct that we're looking at for today's purposes does say accepted or declined.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back on one other point from Tessa? I think she was making the point about giving a reason for accepting or rejecting. If you look at the list of gifts and hospitality presented to our last meeting, you will see that, for instance, the lead member of Transport and Digital Site has been recorded on there simply as lead member for Transport and Digital, site visit, monitoring, being local member, contact for local residents. Now, I don't know whether Councillor Rigby actually put that on there.
Let me just stop you there. I think what we ought to do is probably say a member rather than a specific person.
Sorry,
I know it's on there, but just for the purpose of keeping it objective.
A member
has
put, or that has appeared on a report to us. Now, whether that member declared that, because the same text is used for quite a number of those, and I'm afraid, cynic that I am, that looks very suspicious. They've used the same words for quite a number of those particular entries. That's why we looked at the member putting a reason on the form.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Back to, I've got Tessa, then Scott, Francis, and Brian. Tessa, over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm just going to volunteer, Scott will know this full well, but actually we define hospitality in item 3.2, which is on page 6 of my papers. We don't, and I thought it'd be a bit pedantic to raise it earlier, but since it's come up, I feel that therefore we do need to define gifts and we need to define benefits. And that would be some work for the committee to complete at some point. I think there are one or two things that we still need to sort of squiggle our way round and sort this out. I applaud the efforts of the committee so far. It's absolutely brilliant that we're talking about this, but we do need to make sure that we make a definition if that's appropriate. And I wanted to just be really clear with Hugh, if I may, in saying that at no point had I anticipated anyone being offered money, in that gifts can take all sorts of forms. But I guess we should be specific when we're defining gifts, in that they could take the form of money or something in place of money. They could be tokens or discounts or whatever else it is. I think we should be very careful to make sure that we define this carefully. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tessa. Then we're on to Francis, I think. Sorry, I'll allow you to go first. Scott's had a go.
Thank you very much. This is perhaps a very processy thing. It has been said to me in the last couple of days that the current form, so when we're thinking of revising it, it will be something that it would be wonderful if we could look at. The current form apparently allows members to complete it. I don't know, because I've never had anything to declare in these terms. Allows members to tick the I accepted or I didn't accept it box, but doesn't force them to do so. And that if they don't tick either box, then it is reported in whatever way it is reported as them having accepted. I think it might be a good thing if possibly in a technical term, radio buttons could be used rather than check boxes. And that means that you can only tick one, and you need to make it so you've got to tick one. That's the processy bit about the form itself. And because I believe that I was told of a case where that had happened in the last couple of days.
Discussing the first item, which is.
Oh, right, the level of the thing, right. I was taking the opportunity of getting all in once and not having to talk again on the subject. The other point I wanted to make, it comes up under 3.3, not needing to register gifts and hospitality not related to their role as councillor, such as Christmas gifts from friends and family. Now, I live in a small, very widely spread community. I have done so for the last 36 years. I have supper with my friends. I propose to go on having supper with my friends. I propose to go on giving them supper. And I believe, unless the committee feels that this is not the case, that comes under the such as Christmas gifts from your friends and family. But if this committee doesn't feel that that is the case, then I think we really need to think about this, because we are people who live, we are not people who do not live in our communities. Some people, some members may not be part of the community they represent at all, but many of us are.
Thank you, Francis. Can I just clarify with Scott? It seems to me that the frame of words "role" in your role as a councillor is the important one here. Could you just confirm that I'm right or clarify that for me? So, if you're operating as a friend, that's not as a councillor, then that would be a different situation. But I'll ask Scott for clarification on that, please.
Certainly, Chair. And again, much of this is already defined in terms of one of the very reasons we use the LGA code is there's guidance attached to. So as has already been mentioned, there's a definition for hospitality. There isn't a definition for gifts. No, that's right, because that's not in the LGA guidance. The LGA have gone for an umbrella term in terms of gifts, in terms of any form of benefit gift, whether that's tangible or in kind. So that's why they've just gone for that broad sort of church approach of a definition, but they have specified what they mean by hospitality. We've carried that over to help with our guidance. So effectively, we've just replicated what the LGA say. The LGA are very clear, as is our code, which is this is in relation to your role as a councillor, not in terms of where it's not in undertaking your official duties. And again, it's very clear on the LGA code, which I'm just reading now. It says you do not need to register gifts and hospitality which are not related to your role as a councillor, such as Christmas gifts or gifts from your friends and family. As an example, I think the other point, I mean, we touched on it earlier, and you forgive me, I didn't come in at the time, which was the recommendations on the form include something around reasons in terms of can councillors say their reason for either acceptance or reason for rejection, and I think this was picked up in terms of some of the conversation around. So does the LGA code or does the council's code require members to state reasons? And again, just for clarity, no, they don't. The requirements of both the LGA code and the council's code are that you must register whether you accept or reject, and clearly as part of that, the details of who was that from, but you do not, and it's not specified in the LGA code, you do not have to provide reasons for why you accepted or why you rejected. I can see the recommendations of P3 and I can see from a transparency point why that would be beneficial, but just to clarify, that's not part of our code in terms of having to set reasons.
Thank you, Scott.
We might be making a bit of heavy weather about this. I think we did trust a group to go away and sort this out. I was quite happy to accept the LGA position, but the argument coming back from the group is fair. There's a world of difference between an estate agent offering some top rugby match to a group of councillors and some desperate constituent offering Councillor Dimmery her last tea bag or something. I think that set the price on that one, probably £10, fair enough. You'd have to get a lot of tea out of £10, don't you? And that's probably fair. You couldn't go and say extra cheap for £10, could you? So I think probably we should stick to that. I'd second that. And on the other thing, I'm not happy with the word benefits in this. You might as well say perks, and I wouldn't like to see that in any document.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. Okay, you might want to deal with this then later on, but when I raised the question at our parish council meeting a couple of weeks ago, actually they were completely unaware that there was a gifts and hospitality. I mean, although we have we have the code of conduct, there isn't a process. They weren't aware of a process to record them, and so my question now is should we now be addressing this at LCM meetings and actually making people aware, making parish councils aware of the process? But it comes back to my previous point about the inconsistency between councillors, Somerset councillors' code and parish councillors' code, because we've just accepted the code that was sent out to us, which I imagine was sent out to all other parish councils. And so if that's the case, and this is the form that parish councillors have to fill in as well, then we need to take the box out that says about gifts being declined, because it will confuse the hell out of everyone.
Thank you, David. Right. Well, I think I'm going to try and draw the things together and reflect on what's been said. I think, firstly, we've adopted the LGA because that's one that is proven. It's been through the legal ramifications. So anything we change now, we will need to check legally so that it's quite clear that we're okay to do that. So that's a fairly major task to take to anyway, but it's not one that we shouldn't do because we've got to have something that's appropriate to Somerset as opposed to anywhere else. Secondly, it doesn't include the word benefits at this stage. Thirdly, the level at which we set this, and I'll come back to that in a moment or two, I think that's the point of discussion. But I think for me, and I was about when this was first introduced, when it was £5, and there was all sorts of angst from people who weren't prepared to accept cups of tea when you went around to see a resident who had an issue. And I was one of them. I didn't accept any cups of tea until we got it clarified and moved the element up a bit, because I wasn't really quite sure where I stood, and I thought best to just avoid everything. So this is something that will run and run the levels and all the discussion, and rightly so. It's important, But we have, to me, in my mind, we have two elements really. One is our own moral compass and where we stand in this and what we think is appropriate and the right thing to do. And the other is the public view of what is going on. And that has to be more, a moral compass is our soul or whatever it is. Nobody's written it down. But I think the public situation has to be very clear, written down and clear for everybody. So they all know where they stand. And we're in that situation here. So what I'm going to do is to ask Alan, if you don't mind, to just run through your recommendation again in terms of the level. We'll come back to the form in a moment or two. So everybody, if that's a proposal, I'll ask people to second that proposal. No, I just, you could read it through. I'll make the proposal. I see what you mean.
If you look at paragraph 9 of the working group's report, the group therefore suggests that if the Standards Committee is minded to recommend to council to amend the trigger value, it should be set at £10.
Thank you, Alan. So if I was to convert that into a proposal, that we propose to full council that they amend the trigger value to £10 from 50. Can I have a seconder for that proposal? Brian, second. Perhaps we ought to have a show of hands on this, I think, just to, is everybody else in favour of that? 3 in favour. Hugh, I know when you come from, are you abstaining? No. Against. Hugh's against. So we carry that forward, that we go to full council and recommend that it's moved to £10. What I'm also going to suggest, so that's the proposal, is that we look at the elements of the words benefits. We look at the elements of the consistency that's gone across the board. And I think that's part and parcel of our work in checking that the code of conduct has been adopted throughout the 296 councils that we're involved in. And we know that's not the case. And we'll come back to a bit more discussion on that when we look at the survey replies that are coming back at the moment. Okay, so let's just make a note of that. £10 level. Scott, would you deal with the rest of the process to get it forward to full council?
Yes. Yeah. There'll be a full council meeting on the 20th of December. That's the very next council meeting. That would require amendments to sections. Don't worry about it. I know where you mean.
Thank you, Scott. I don't think we've seen the last of this one. I think it will run and run.
Chair, do you want to take the change to the register form?
Yes, I was going to move on to that.
Sorry.
Thank you, Alan. Then the second element of this is to consider any changes required to the gifts and hospitality form set out in Appendix 2. Any comments on that? Robin?
Yeah, just really to just support what Francis said. I think, you know, if what you don't want to do is give people an opportunity to not fill in that box at the bottom. So as she quite rightly said, you know, in sort of, you know, if you can have it as an electronic form, it's one or the other, not the opportunity to either skip the field or have both, for example. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Any other comments on that form?
Just a suggestion, Chair, that I mean, if the committee is minded to agree the amended form, I'd suggest that probably also is included in the report to council. It is on this point about, I can certainly see the value in terms of transparency, but I'd still come back to both the model code and our own code don't require members to set out reasons. That doesn't mean that you can't recommend it, but I think in terms of adoption of such an approach, would usually do with the approval of full council.
Alan?
Chair, if I might, can I suggest that in fact we take the form in two parts? First part being accept, reject as a separate box. Because I think that's probably acceptable to everybody. The second part would be the reasons, because that might not be acceptable to everybody. So if you split it into two parts, one part might get through and one part might not. Thank you.
Okay, so you're making a suggestion to try and move on, really. First suggestion from Alan is that we take up to receive the offer, accept or reject it in separate boxes. Everybody happy to take that one? Thank you. It seems that that's across the board. And then we've got the reasons. And is everybody happy to take the reason situation into the form as well?
Sorry, Chair.
Well,
Chair, I was actually suggesting that when you get to council, full council, you take them as two separate bits, not necessarily here.
Is it being proposed that it should be compulsory to fill that, or that it should be recommended? What is it proposed to council?
Would you like to make a proposal, Francis? No. Okay. Well, I'll try and précis what I think your proposal is. It's a question about well, no, I'm making it. I'm trying to précis what I think you're.
There is nothing.
Okay. So would you like to clarify again where you're coming from?
I was unclear from your remarks as to whether there appeared to be a proposal coming that would be voted on by this committee as to be put as to whether or not that box should become compulsory. And I was unclear what the situation was. And when somebody said, oh, no, that's a decision for council, well, the decision this body's got to make first.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'll make a proposal that it's mandatory that people put in the reasons for their for filling the form in, for accepting the gifts. That's my proposal. Over for discussion.
Chairman, if I might, I would prefer to see that the box is there for members to complete. You will see under that box that there is the comment that if this committee is not satisfied with the reason put down, it might offer advice to the member and might seek the member to come and speak to us. If the member doesn't put anything in the box that's as to why they've accepted it, we can still take a decision as to whether we want to see that member on that box. My thought being then that it is not compulsory but highly recommended that they complete that box. I wonder if that makes members, councillors here, happier.
Francis, sorry.
It certainly doesn't make me happier because it frustrates the intention of the if the box is not compulsory, it is effectively being made compulsory by the back door, and I don't think that's an appropriate way to behave. If we want it to be compulsory, it should be compulsory. I do not believe that we should go beyond the code of conduct. We have a code of conduct which says that it is not compulsory. Unless we are prepared to change the code of conduct, we should not try to make this form different and not agree with the code of conduct. And I actually don't think it's quite apart from that. I would at this stage, not having had a discussion on the matter, I would be very concerned about the idea of changing the code of conduct in this respect.
Somebody else had that. Brian, sorry, right next.
I agree with that. Something's either required or not required. That's what you mean. Jeremy Thorpe was totally silent and got not convicted of murder for it, didn't he?
Thank you. Would you like to make a counter proposal, Francis?
I think I disagree, actually. I think if you're going for transparency and we're going for openness and whatever else, and we're reducing the limit, and we're changing the code of conduct from 50 down to 10, is there a problem with changing, giving the reasons? I mean, you know, there could be very, I think this is a very positive thing, actually, that if somebody is accepting what could be seen more widely as being a gift, such as, you know, tickets for Glastonbury. You know, if they've got a valid and very genuine reason for being there, then why not disclose those? And that might actually stop a lot of complaints and stuff coming through, or just, you know, people looking at the register and saying, oh my God, you know, he's accepted, or she has accepted 340 quid's worth of Glastonbury tickets. You know, what's that all about? You know, the reason is there and open. And in the interests of transparency, I would say I don't see any reason why we shouldn't.
Well, I see no reason why people shouldn't.
Scott. Thank you, Francis.
I think again, just to assist particularly Councillor Nicholson's point, I mean, Councillor Nicholson is right that the code of conduct, both at the LGA and at Somerset Council, does not specify the requirement to set out reasons either for acceptance or for rejection. I can see her point that for consistency, by recommending it on a form, you should also connect it with the code itself and specify that relevant sections. I'm just reminding myself in terms of the code of conduct, sections 9.5 and 9.6, the very same ones that have got the value in. If this is something that P3 group is recommending, I can see, you know, certainly in terms of the value from a transparency point, there is a logical case that says that the committee should also recommend to council, not just in terms of the form, but that 9.5 and 9.6, in addition to changing £50 to £10, also includes the words and the reasons for, because that's not a current requirement either of our code nor of the LGA. So there is a connection that I can see Councillor Nicholson's point, which is around how a form has then required something in addition to the code, and therefore the ability of the council to enforce that.
Thank you, Scott. Okay.
And there is there is another problem, which is that we have felt it very important to try to get city, town and parish councils to adopt the same code of conduct. Every time we tinker with it, we either have to persuade 259, if not 3 million other people to agree to all this, or we are going away from this consistency, which we felt to be important.
But I just remind everybody, we've already voted to move it to £10, so we've already changed something. So unless you want to rescind or go back on that vote.
But that, I think, is relatively straightforward, and many parish councils will decide not to do that. But we start, the more we change, the more difficult it will become.
Well, I think the other alternative approach to answer that, Francis, is to say, well, if we are going to change one thing, we do both at the same time. So that makes it less difficult, if you like. But we're already going to have to promote this change to people. So doing the other thing at the same time, I don't think it's extra work. It's actually just as much work. And I appreciate the point you're making that it's very difficult and we've got to go out and promulgate it to 296. We've already voted to actually take that on the chin, effectively as I can see it, by moving it from 50 to £10. So in terms of the work to get the message out there, we've got that already in the previous proposal that we've made. So we're really now saying, what are the formal words in the form? I'll let
I don't
let
think
David
that's
speak.
the-
And then
I don't think that's the case on this point specifically. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to go to parish councils and say, well, we think £10 is a better idea. What do you think? And they'll either say yes or no. But to go to them and say, right, you've got to write out reasons, you've got to make that compulsory. I think there will be a just go away and leave us alone bit.
okay, thank you, Francis. David.
I think there might actually be three things that we need to go back to parish councils with. And the third one being 9.6 on here, where we're saying if we want consistency across codes of conduct for council level and parish council, town council level, you might actually have to reintroduce 9.6, because I think the version that we had in Kingston St Mary is the version that was sent out to all parish councils.
Okay, right. Maybe we've got the hand up. No, right. Let's see. I'm going to try to make a proposal then. My proposal is for acceptance or rejection is that we have the reasons on the form. We don't make it compulsory. And I think, Alan, you raised the point afterwards that it can be possible for the members of standard committee to be involved in that process.
Yes, Chair, we would see the reasons given for the declaration.
And if they weren't given reasons? If the reasons weren't given, sorry.
If reasons weren't given or we weren't happy with the reasons given for acceptance, we could question the member concerned.
Scott, sorry.
Chair, it comes back to the point about for the rationale for transparency reasons for asking that reasons are inserted onto that form. To add weight to that, then this committee would need to agree to recommend to council that 9.5 and 9.6, in addition to the change in the value, include specifically reference to reasons for accepting or reasons for rejecting. By doing that, if somebody then does not provide reasons, they are thereby in breach of the code of conduct because they're not complying with the code of conduct. The challenge with amending a form is that it will be difficult to challenge an individual member who quite rightly at the moment would say, yes, you've asked me to fill a form in, but I'm not required by the code of conduct to say my reasons. So that will be difficult to enforce. But if this committee is minded to not just recommend changing the trigger value, but also asking that reasons also be stated as part of 9.5 and 9.6, that will add weight to compliance.
Let me make another proposal then, or amplify on the proposal I've already given, is that the reasons are included in the form and it's not compulsory that those are filled in, but it will require a change in 9.5 and 9.6, and that should come forward to full council with the change in the value, 50 to £10 at the same time. Don't discuss the 50 and £10 again, please. That's just tying the two together. Does that seem a fair reflection of where we've got to? And I hate to think we've ended up with a camel, the horse designed by a committee, by going through this process, but consultation without. Is that a fair reflection? Did you, putting hands up would be useful. Do you agree? Show of hands, Francis? It's going to be tight then. Thank you, Brian. It's 2, 4, 1 abstention. Hugh. I will at the minute, yeah. But yes. I'm like, in a moment, I'm. Abstention? Yeah. Okay, well, that's carried by my casting vote, I think, isn't it? 2 votes. Two votes, yeah. Yeah, well, I could add another third one, according to Francis, but, okay. I think it's like that, Right, we'll just move on now, but I will just say I was involved the first time this came round and the discussions were just as long, just as labyrinthine. And so I think we need to recognise when we change anything, it's quite critical. And thank you to P3 for giving it this careful thought, coming forward with these thoughts and ideas that we've all come round to agree. It will go to full council. Is everybody happy? Do you want to read out what you think is the final stage, Steve? Would that be unfair of me to ask you?
Unfair.
Right, okay, fair enough, fair enough.
But I think that last one, you said reasons to include, or the reasons for acceptance or non-acceptance to be included. They will not be compulsory, and that there was a need to change 9.5, 9.6 on the code of conduct to reflect that requirement or recommendation.
Thank you, Steve. Sorry, I put you on the spot there a bit. Scott.
Forgive me, Chair, but again, if you recommend to council and council adopt amending 9.5 and 9.6 to include reasons, they will be compulsory.
It was, yes, I moved away from the compulsory bit. But if that still means that whatever we put in there, it's compulsory, then that's the interpretation of the box.
It isn't, it's just that in effect, that would mean 9.5 and 9.6 would have the addition of words that members are recommended to set out reasons. You forgive me, but I'll advise you, you can recommend someone to do it, but if they don't want to do it, you won't be able to enforce it. It's an option.
Yeah.
You just need to be alive to that.
Thank you, Scott. I think on the bounds of reasonability, that's about as far as I recommend, and I accept fully what you're saying. It's my own view, and I'm not going to say that I go down the compulsory route, but sitting on the fence, and I've got plenty of splinters to show for that. Okay, thank you. Blower here. Have we covered item 5? On to item 6. Well, really, this is a report from David Clark, and I really seek 2 elements from you, which is 1, comments or clarifications, and secondly, what we do with the info. I think that's important to be aware of that, because there's no point in people producing information if nobody does anything with it. Sorry, that's a bit of a shibboleth I've been involved with all my life. So you've all had a chance to read through. I will just pick up any comments I'll go around the room in the opposite way, starting with Brian this time on the report.
Well, I'm not sure people aren't doing anything with it. There's some nice diagrams in here which shows how disrespectful and disreputable the council is. So that's good.
Thank you, Brian. Perhaps I'll come back to Scott later on.
I thought it was never going to happen, Chair. Thank you so much. This what we're talking about now is in this year, 2023. I've got this here, 2022 May, and technically it hasn't been dealt with as far as the complainant is concerned, and myself. Why?
Yeah, well, I think that's a fair question. We can't pick up individual situations, obviously, in this committee, but I think it's a fair question. It needs to be addressed perhaps outside the committee, Scott. And I might thank you for that, Hugh, because I think we're all going to be involved in these. And if you remember back about a year ago, we said before we went live with these new codes of conduct thing, we wanted to run a test trial. We never did it because we couldn't find a way of doing it. And what we're doing now effectively is having to test drive it through our own experiences, if you like. Nothing wrong with that, but it's quite difficult to make policy on 1 or 2 experiences and to get into the depth at these meetings, which I think they deserve, rightly deserve, from you. Sorry, is that okay with my reasoning for that one, Hugh?
You, Chair, there's no point in prolonging it, Chair. You know, I'm disappointed that I've had to bring it to this committee. But I can understand because of the change and losing this officer into a new capacity, another job. Consequently, the other person, I think, was just involved in it to start with. I can remember being approached by a officer to give my accounts of incidents, and that's where I left it, and I've heard no more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Perhaps we could make a note, Steve, that needs to be taken offline and then addressed. Francis.
Yeah, I was very interested. We had a huge number of complaints at the beginning of the council in May, as we can see from the papers. And I remember I was very interested in whether this was potentially a legacy, potentially a thing about the change, and was it going to settle down? Well, it appears to be doing so. I feel therefore reassured, I hope rightly, that we are not going to be facing a heightened number of complaints forevermore. Remembering we've actually got twice the number of councillors as we used to have, but we don't have the district councillors. So I am less worried about have we got a big enough department, I believe, because the numbers seem to be coming down. But I stand to be corrected if I misunderstood that. What I don't see from this report, which is the other half of this, and that ties in with Hugh, which is, have we still got a problem with the legacy from the predecessor councillors? If we have, what are we doing about it? When will we get through it? And that's not in this report. I'm not sure whether, I think I expected it to be, but then I may have got it wrong as to why I expected that. But I do think it's something that this committee perhaps ought to be interested in.
Thank you, Francis. Yeah, I would agree with that. Anybody else want to make a comment? David?
Yes. Interesting that you mentioned the sort of test run, because P1 Group were going to try and organise that. Well, actually, I did submit a complaint against the council, and it was a genuine complaint, but it was interesting to see whether, having put together the timelines and whatever else, whether or not those timelines were met. And actually, in this case they weren't. And I can understand, as you say, all the reasons why they might not have been. But my complaint somehow sort of got lost in the system, and so it was submitted in August, 22nd of August. It was responded to immediately, within 3 days in terms of the confirmation, and with a promise to come back and confirm which deputy ML would take it on and references, numbers and whatever else. But actually that didn't come back until it was all about a month out of date. So I mean, the timelines were missed significantly. It seems as if, and the response was, firstly, I'd like to apologise for the delay in dealing with this matter. Unfortunately, I thought the complaint had been picked up by one of my colleagues to deal with, but following a recent monitoring officer report we established on that. So I mean, there are a couple of things there that, if we're going to publish timelines, we either stick to them, or we, if there's a good reason why we don't, then we need to make people aware. I wouldn't have worried if somebody said, look, there are a lot of reasons we might not meet these timelines, but actually we didn't. I mean, the thing that response flagged to me was that actually there isn't really a proper system of monitoring who complaints are. Yeah, I'm sure there is, but it somehow felt, whether it's because you've got 5 systems or 4 or 5 systems coming together or whatever, but this one fell through the cracks. And I did actually point out in my initial correspondence that I'm a cooperative member on the standards committee, so that might have raised a flag, but it didn't. And so I think there is I say, if we're going to publish timelines, then we either stick to them or we make it clear. But the fact that there doesn't seem to be a system that flags when something's not hitting those timelines shows that something just needs to be reviewed.
Thank you, David. You've had copies, subsequent papers, which was from the P1 group, which was David Stripp's comments that he raised about this particular complaint and David Clark's response to that. So you've had those as part of the, was it the initial papers or the subsequent papers? Probably the subsequent papers, I think. So that gives you the background to that situation. But there's an element of that you want to pick up there. Has everybody that wants to had to say? Because I think I want to just try and. Oh, sorry.
Chair, one quick one. On page 24 of the agenda pack, paragraph 4.3, last line, the council achieved this target 35% of the time. So we achieved the target 19 out of 55. In the 36 cases of no substantive response, have most received a holding communication? In other words, have they been told, we are still looking at your complaint?
I asked that question of David Clark, and I was told that the procedure was that if the dates were slipped, the timelines were slipped, then there would be immediately a response to say, sorry, it's been more difficult and more complex, we haven't got around to you, and sending them a new date timeline. But overall, trying to get back to the situation where that, so people would be always kept in the loop. But I'll just look to Scott to confirm that is the case.
Yes, it is, Chair.
I think it's, you know, we set timelines down. They may have to be amended because of, I'll come to the moment, because of the complexity of the case or perhaps illness or something like that. But we need to keep people in the frame, in the loop. So I'll come back on another point in a moment. I'll just pick Francis up.
Yes, it's on a slightly related subject. In another part of the council that I've had to do with in the past, there has been a temptation to, if something has passed its deadline, then we go on and deal with the thing that can be dealt with within deadline, and the one that's already late gets later. So I'm not aware that we've had any information, and it may be that I haven't read properly, as to how long the ones that go over time limit, how long they go on. Because it's awfully easy to have those ones sitting at the bottom of the pile and staying at the bottom of the pile.
Yes, I agree. I think, and I did think we might get into that situation. There was a tsunami of stuff coming through from the vesting day, and I did, in my previous experience, the best thing to do is to take part of those offline to a group, keep the rest of them going through the system and deal with them, rather than just get everybody feeling that they're just going under the pressure of work and not achieving anything. So get them out of the way, clear them, and then go back onto the normal system. And I hope that's, well, I've got a few more comments I'd like to make when it comes down to my turn. Yeah, can I? Well, I'll come back to my points, and I'll come back to David and to Robin. I think we've got their hands up. I'm looking at the grid on page 24, which has the number of complaints, and I think I personally felt that would be useful to know the number that were reconciled. That's, as I understand, the number coming in, but the number reconciled, and there may not be the same number, but because we started with a clean sheet on April 1, that's the sort of start of the basis. So, and I'll go through, perhaps I'll go through all my points as well. There were 3 or 4 points. The other one was the, on page 25, last line of 4.3, which was that we need, where it says, "It's hoped this performance measure will show clear signs of improvement." And I think that's something we need as a committee to be monitoring, that metric is improving. Actually, I think there was the other ones have been answered on the way through. So that was my proposals. Perhaps I'll just come back to Scott to pick that up. And I would say that I have a firm view in, as I had in work, that if you're going to add more information to people to report on, you have to decide what you're taking off. So otherwise it just grows and nobody can read it because it's too complex and too difficult. So I was just going to suggest the addition of a column to the right, a number of complaints showing the ones that were reconciled. But that should link back into the line by line document that David's sent through with the complainants, with that one. I'm not sure what it's called actually. Appendix 1 it's called. Would that be possible, Scott?
Something to look at for the next meeting, Chair.
Okay. Right. The other thing, sorry, that's my point. So the other thing that I was picking up from David earlier on, and I wondered whether I was just going to make this as a suggestion. It's about the timeline slipping. And I wondered if we had on there, Scott, on the, again, Appendix 1, the responsible officer. So if you like, the caseworker, I mean, I can't think of the right word for this, but do you see the point I'm making? There's one of the lines there. Because that should really point up who's leading on that. If they've fallen under a bus or something like that, then somebody will pick that up and run with it. But that's for them to ensure it's seen through to completion. And not on the basis that we want to hammer them if it's not done, because we hope there'll be perfectly reasonable reasons and they will have been, the complainant or the people involved in the process will have been contacted anyway about that. Is that possible to do that, do you think, Scott?
I mean, clearly we know who the assessing officer is. It's just that you'll appreciate Appendix 1 goes to some length in anonymising individuals. Clearly by naming assessing officer, you won't be anonymising, you'll be identifying a specific officer who's doing a piece of work. But again, in terms of from a FOI type of perspective, that's not something we would withhold. Clearly the individuals there are, you know, it is published knowledge in terms of who the deputy monitoring officers are that complete the assessment. So it can be done.
Would it break the, I mean, you're concerned about anonymity at this stage, and this form is intended to be anonymous. Names are removed. I would accept your advice on this. And the reason I'm suggesting this is I'm trying to think why the timelines that David referred to have been slipped or missed. Because they weren't sure. I think the phrase you were written to about, you might like to just read that out again.
Firstly, I'd like to apologise. Firstly, I'd like to apologise for the delay in dealing with this matter. Unfortunately, I thought the complaints had been picked up by one of my colleagues to deal with, but following a recent monitoring officer meeting, we established no one had done. Therefore, I now deal with this for you.
First off, Paul, I've got you in the wings, so I know you want to speak. First off, I would just say that I think that's laudable that the person has owned up and explained that reason of why things have gone by. So I think that's good news. But how do we? Should that have been picked up earlier? And I'm fully aware that we've gone through a very difficult period, Scott. So this is not about a blame culture at all here, by any way, shape, or form. And we are showing by the figures that we are concerned about, that Francis mentioned. So I'll just pick this. I'll come back to Paul and then to Scott. So that's the reason for it, and I think we perhaps you might like to consider that following this meeting in terms of its implications.
Yeah, I could take a look into that, Chair, by all means. I think the principal reasons for the majority of these instances are set out already in 4.3, which is the recognition that as part of completing the assessments, you're liaising with both the subject member and the complainant, or in some cases, multiple complainants, potentially about the same member. And that takes time in terms of they're allowed certain amounts of time in which to submit evidence. So working through that means you're dependent on all the various parties all working within that timescale.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I think we knew that when we set this thing up, that there was an awful lot of links in the chain. That might cause us perhaps to review the timescales at some point, but I think if that helps to sort of know who, and not from this point of view, this group, but perhaps why people have missed out. Okay, Scott, can I leave you to just review that when you've got a chance to make an informed discussion or think about it, really. Let me come back to Paul. It's been waiting.
I would agree with Scott. I don't think that the identification of the officers is appropriate when everything else is so confidential. And as it's recorded on the, so I'm afraid I would be supporting the officers on this occasion and saying no, it should not be made public. That would be my view.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. I would also support officers. I think the job of monitoring the workload of the deputy monitoring officers to see whether they are meeting the standards we have set them is a job for the monitoring officer initially. Perhaps if we come back to this problem, if we still have this problem in 12 months' time, then we might ask for it. But I would strongly, if I were a local government officer now, I would strongly object to that suggestion, Chair.
Okay, Scott, sorry.
Apologies, Chair. You'll forgive me for this because it's not directly related to the matter which we're discussing, but it's principally again. I think that has happened, which is the one thing I was going to raise. I noted that a gentleman who had joined the meeting was wearing a T-shirt, which I believe is citing the name of a potential parliamentary candidate. And again, in terms of the use of council resources for political purposes, I would ask that person not to put their camera on, or at least to change their T-shirt in question, again, because the council is under specific obligations to ensure that its resources, and in this case its webcasting, is not used for the purposes of political natures. And I can just note, as the gentleman's now just come on screen again, if I could ask that he either switches his camera off or not wear that T-shirt during a council meeting, please. Yes, because it effectively exposes the council in terms of that.
You're muted, John.
Thank you, Paul. I'm getting the feeling that my suggestion about the officer, caseworker officer, is not put on there rather. So I'll take that back. So is there anything else we can take out apart from the comments I've made about having looked at the reconciliations of the appeals? And I think that was it. Sorry, Robin, you got it?
Yeah, we both had our hand up, so.
Did you? Right.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so one thing on Appendix 1, and it relates to one of the public questions that we had earlier, which was if we've engaged external investigators, external resources, sort of yes or no was the question to the member of the public. But that we've got no indication from that on Appendix 1. And that might be a useful thing to know, you know, but and particularly that would also indicate, you know, it's going to take a longer time to resolve. But we've got no indication on there whether we're waiting, you know, we've engaged an external investigator or not for this complaint. And I think that would be a useful thing to know.
Okay. Anyone else got a thought on that one? That particular point, Francis? I'll come back to that. My personal view is that I think we can pick those questions up as we go along, as they were today in the public question time. And the reason I say that is I think it's a point at which we allow officers to get on with their job and deploy resources which may be external in order to achieve the timelines that is our responsibility to see that they're achieved. They've got to manage the resources in order to do that. And I think that's the sort of conversation where I've withdrawn my having the monitoring officer who was responsible off there. And I think it's a balance, fine balance. That'd be my view, but I don't know whether I'm speaking completely differently from everybody else. If you're happy with that response, Robin. Anybody else want to make a comment? Francis.
Yeah, question of the use of resources and consultants, and we all know that there are very good reasons for using consultants at times to deal with loads of work and so on. It's really a matter for the audit committee rather than us, because it's a cost question rather than a standards question, it seems to me. I do have a one question to ask about the spreadsheet, if and when it's.
You'd like to do that now?
On page 28, an individual councillor's name is mentioned. Is that what we ought to be doing?
Scott, would you like? We've already discussed this. Probably appropriate to. Well, I'll say I noticed that, and it'll be removed. So thank you for raising that. And any copies that have it in will have to be jumped. We're going to come into the end of item 6, so we can move on to item 7. So I'll take the two hands that are up. Firstly, Alan, and then David.
Thank you, Chair. There's been discussion about consultants. Are consultants actually the independent person? In which case it is something for us rather than consultants for audit.
Scott, could I ask you to respond to that?
In terms of the assessments and investigations, no, the consultants are not the independent persons. The independent persons are that, they are independent. There are occasions when there are other parties engaged to work on behalf of the council to assist with either assessments or investigations.
I'll come back to David in a moment. These are suitably qualified people.
They are, Chair, yes. I mean, they're generally, the sort of people we would engage are generally those that have undertaken these kinds of investigations or assessments for other councils. So they have experience in doing this. They'll be fully aware of our own codes of conduct and the LGA model code as well. So they'll understand the procedures fully.
Are you happy with that response, Alan? Thank you. David.
No, the point I was going to make on the spreadsheet was that out of the 18 complaints, only one of them relates to a council, Somerset Council. So, it would have been a very short list in the old days.
Yeah.
Is this, is this causing a problem? Is this the sort of level that you would anticipate? Is there any messages to come out from the fact that 17 out of 18 are complaints that previously you wouldn't have dealt with?
I'll ask Scott in a moment, but I would think just the purely level of 296 versus 110 would give you at least 3 times, roughly the 3 times to start with. But I think also it's early days for us all, so maybe there's things to come along, and I think that possibly, from my view, and I'll ask Scott to just reinforce to confirm this perhaps or deny it, is that that's the legacy of perhaps some of the stuff that's coming through from pre-vesting data. Like Scott, sorry, could you?
I need to add that, I mean, that the point that I think is being made about Appendix 1 is the majority of those listed relate to either town or parish councillors in terms of that conduct. I suppose contextually, you don't need me to remind you, but from my own knowledge, there are approximately well over 2,000 parish and town councillors across Somerset, when you consider we have 280 of those, again, just in terms of numbers and statistics. In terms of should we be concerned in part, or is there a role in terms of, I think the committee, I think was one of the areas that I believe the conversation was heading. I think for me, there's a relationship clearly with the work of the priority groups, because fundamentals to, I suppose, helping the level of complaints will be the work with which we can do with all of the town and parish councils to adopt a consistent code, and with that, what support could be provided them in terms of training and guidance. Clearly, the more that people adopt and use what is the originating LGA code, there is lots of training material already there. The more that people move away from the LGA code, you need to then create more bespoke trainings. That's one of the benefits of using the LGA code, that there is lots of guidance there to help support its adoption and to help work through some more specific examples, which I think is one of the critical things, particularly when you work through you know, the type of conduct and the type of instances that can form the basis of complaints. That helps for that.
Let's move on to item 7, which is the Code of Conduct adoption. And this is a paper from David. Scott, do you want to speak to that?
Certainly, Chair, and again, you can hopefully see in terms of the covering report, particularly in terms of the work that's been undertaken on the survey and the results that are set out in Appendix 1. And then really it's also in terms of just seeking the committee's views in terms of proposed or potential next steps.
Thank you, Scott. What I propose now is to just have a very brief discussion about this information, then ask the group who's looking at this area to look at it in more detail. I'm aware it's 4 o'clock now, and I had a personal hill to get past 4 o'clock, or before 4 o'clock. So I'll take any comments at this point, and just remind me which group's looking after this one. P2, thank you. Francis, you had a...
We're particularly keen to know, as I remember, if there was any useful information to be got where they had amended the code before they adopted it. And there were 10, we understand there were 10 responses on that. But we wanted to know whether there was any useful information. Well, we haven't got any information here, so we nor even a note to say no, there wasn't anything useful. That was perhaps our question. And my only remark that will need to be taken back to the group, I think, is that we need to think about the impact of us changing our code on the work with towns and parishes.
Thank you, Francis. So you're waiting for some qualitative information. Right, okay. What sort of information would you like? Right. So at the bottom of question 5, you'd like some qualitative information in response to that. Is that possible, Scott? Okay. Okay, so that's how quickly could you get that to P2?
Certainly within the next, I'd say certainly within the next few weeks. We've got all the base information itself. For me, then it's just in terms of putting that in the format that P2 can find useful.
Thank you, Al. You ought to be sitting next to me. Any other questions on the information in agenda item 7?
If I may, Chair, it's disappointing in a way that we've only had, according to this report, 139 responses. When SALC did their consultation, there were 200 responses, 77 missing. And I know Andrew was going to do a chase up. I don't know whether that happened. in early September.
Basically, I don't know whether a further email was sent out. Obviously, since Andrew's left, haven't been able to contact him. But we just obviously have the result from the data from the survey, and it was unfortunately a fairly poor response.
I would suggest, because I haven't come back to the points I had, which was really along that lines, was how do we encourage the take up? Because the same question is about the code of conduct. How do we encourage the take up of that? And I think I would ask P2 to look at that when we look at the details from this, how we take this survey forward, how do we increase the take up on that survey, but also on the code of conduct. They're happy to take that on board. I'm looking at Frances particularly as she's chairing that group. Well, yes, I'm sure we're not reinventing the wheel here, but it may be worthwhile just reviewing the situation because it is. Yes, well, please do that, but don't beat each other with them, hopefully. I think that's, for that, to have that conversation now in here would be quite labyrinthine. But I would think it's a question we've been trying to address right for the last 18 months, basically, isn't it? About how we get this code of conduct through and how we get better responses. We are all have the time to do. Yeah. I don't think we have the answers to those sort of questions here and now, because otherwise we'd have done it. Yeah, so it's a question of going around the buoy again and seeing what we can come up with, suggesting that to officers, bringing that to the next meeting, which is in next January. And you used the word, I can task you. I was sort of asking you to volunteer to take on the task rather than me tasking you. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. With a house full of grandchildren, there'll be plenty of wet towels, I can tell you. So, and that's not why I'm delaying the end of this meeting, because I've got to go back to it. So looking at the work programme, I'll come back to the action plan in a moment or two. The gifts and hospitality register, we've gone through. Minutes action plan, come back to in a moment. We're working through the work programme at the moment. Code of conduct adoption, we've just talked about that as P2 to have a look at how we can increase the uptake. Speed of responding to complaints, that's P1 to keep a review of that. Review the operation effectiveness of the council officer's code of conduct. That's, I think, what date did we put on that?
January meeting, Chair.
Yeah, January. So that's the date. Is that the 12th? 24th of January. Standards Committee annual report, that will come forward to that meeting as well. We'll have a gift and hospitality register to come forward for the March meeting. Next one's the March meeting, next one's the March meeting, next one's the March meeting. And that's what we've got so far on for January. Is that a fair reflection of where we're at? Robin?
Yeah, Chair, I know it's obviously just a small point, but on the report to full council, we had talked about co-presenting that. I don't know whether we could make a note in there that if we're still minded to co-present it, that it will be co-presented.
Yeah, well, I'm quite happy with that. In fact, when I did the last one, I thought that's what was going to be, and there was nobody there apart from me to present the report. Sorry, Scott.
Just a suggestion, Chair, again for the committee to consider. In terms of your annual report and timing, just to flag again in terms of that cycle, I mean, that is the budget meeting of the council. Generally, the budget meeting gets dominated by the budget. I just wonder in terms of timing wise, many of the sort of recommendations that are likely to come from standards have a relationship with the constitution in real terms. The constitution is targeted at the May council meeting. So I just wonder whether, just a thought for consideration, whether actually the annual report should be adjusted to the May council meeting to tie in with any recommendations that you have relating to the various codes of conduct, because I can see that they're coming to your March cycle of meetings purposefully to target May. So I just wonder whether there's a thought around whether the annual report should be similarly aligned.
Yeah.
Very meeting. Well, I take your view on that really, because you know the bigger context of the work that's on the programme for full council. You felt that was more appropriate?
Again, I was just thinking about the alignment with your annual report will probably equally align well with any recommendations to work on the constitution. Whereas as currently scheduled, you'll be taking an annual report in February, and then you'll be bringing another report in May with a series of recommendations potentially about constitutional changes. It may be more sensible to align the two.
But just to clarify, the changes we've agreed here are for the December. Yeah. So this is what would come out of the report. What would come out of the report? Okay. Well, that seems reasonable. If that, and Scott's got the bigger context of the work plan for the full council, so we'll take that forward to May. We can still be working on it through that period anyway, and we may choose to adopt a report before, quite a while before that, but it'll come for the May. Coming back to the question that Robin raised about co-presenting, I'm more than happy that that's the case. I don't know whether there are any procedural issues about that. In which case, if we've agreed what the report is, then we'll just agree how we do a double act, basically. Whoever it is that's doing the double act. Fine, okay, so co-present and we'll find a volunteer. Okay. That's it, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, I'll make sure I've captured any actions on the action plan behind me in our focus graphic, because I haven't been able to capture them all because of the excitement of the day. Robin.
Chair, I have one point in any other business or at the end of the meeting, and it's just for
there isn't any other business on the agenda.
Well, exactly.
But I'll provide this because I don't have any other business. But I'll provide dispensation in this case.
Well, that's very kind of you. It came out of a town and parish council meeting that I went to last night, just as a member of the public, and I just wanted to clarify in my own mind, because obviously pre-vesting day, this committee was receiving complaints for county councillors making decisions and then, you know, actioning them. And we're now in a position where we're dealing with town and parish council complaints as well. So when the question is, to clarify in my own mind how it works, when we make a decision, so when the monitoring officer or deputy monitoring officer have made a determination, and say for sake of argument, a breach was found in a hypothetical example, and the monitoring officer writes to the clerk, I assume, and then where do we stand in terms of the action that the town and parish council take? Are we then completely delinked from the process and they're minded to do whatever they like? Do they have any statutory responsibility to bring it before full council? You know, can they take our recommendations? See, I think I know the answer to a lot of this, but I just really wanted to, because of the meeting that I had last night, I wanted somebody to explain it to me again in plain English for a hypothetical example, to save in, you know, for town and parish council A, that there was a breach. You know, where do we go the process once we've made the monitoring officer sends that information to the town and parish council? Thank you.
I'll try and answer that, but I'll ask Scott to keep me on the right side. But basically, we operate under the code of conduct, their code of conduct, which may not be ours, and that process will go through along the lines that their code of conduct sets out. But we'll be using the framework that we've agreed and the timelines that we've agreed. And when and if the decision comes out, it's down to the council to choose to do what they like with it. We did ask at the one hearing panel I was involved with, and I haven't heard any more thinking about it, for some feedback as to what was happening as a result of that. And I haven't heard that, but that's the only hearing panel that we've had. So it's this situation about the different codes of conduct, and also they are the sort of overriding body in this situation. But Scott, I'll defer to you if I've come.
I mean, ultimately, in essence, our statutory responsibilities are to complete the assessments and, in some cases, the investigation. And where we make a determination and recommendations, those recommendations are made then to the council, as in the parish or town council. It is for them to determine then what action or sanctions it then wants to. It has the benefit of the advice of Somerset Council's monitoring officer, but is ultimately a decision for them. We cannot impose. We are merely making recommendations.
Just to clarify, Scott, do we make recommendations to the clerk? So the clerk, if minded not to, would not have to share that with the councillors?
Well, I mean, that'd be an unfortunate position if they do that. Again, because of their statutory responsibilities of the council, they'll be inadvertently putting the council in breach. But the council has to receive such a report. It's also supposed to inform us in terms of, certainly in terms of our procedural points, in terms of what action it's taken.
Okay, that's interesting, Scott. So there is a requirement for them to come back and inform us, is there?
Okay, Robin. Francis.
Yes, this isn't any other business, but the report back from the P2 group last time, which was keeping under review the effectiveness of the committee and so on. And I know there's a date of the 27th of March on it, but it's keeping under review. And the one bit that didn't work earlier this year of the operation of this was the setting of dates for hearings, which had to happen. And it's a time-consuming and very difficult task for officers to find out our availability, unless we're prepared to use those of us who have access to it. The county Outlook system doesn't mean to say we need to do anything about keeping anything that anybody can see in, but just to block out our time in there when we're not available, and it would save an enormous amount of officer time and a lot of irritation on the part of members if we were to do that, because it would make the setting of hearing dates and any other dates that we need to have much simpler. And I was tasked with the P2 group to ask for that to be on the agenda of this meeting. And it's there under something for the 27th of March. But so anyway, I've raised it here because of that.
Would you be happy for us to bring that forward to the next meeting? I mean, I can give you my own.
Yeah, this be brought forward for the next meeting, fine.
Without discussing it at length, I think if we could do that. I know what my personal view is, but I'll leave that to one side for the moment. So is that?
Question of just logging out when you're not available.
Yeah.
Those of us who do happen to use Outlook to keep the diary, it's very convenient, but it's too much available between 10 and 4 on this day.
Okay. So without having that discussion now, because no, I think I think we finished. I've got three things just to say. Firstly, two now. One is that if the P1 and P2 and P3 could do their reports individually, I think it'd be easy for officers to. I think there was some comments which just Francis reminded me was on in one of the work programs. I think it was added into the point you've just made, and maybe we're missing them at that point. So yeah. Well, perhaps they go in as they come in and not added into another document, perhaps. But that's one point. Steve wants to speak.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea. We can publish them as a separate report, but I will give deadlines nearer the time for the meeting so that certain councillors know when to get things to me. Thank you.
And the second thing was that we have, I just thought I'd feedback that we haven't actually got a new cooperative member yet. The process is ongoing. I meant to say that at the start. That is it. So I'll leave the individual groups to decide when they meet up. End of the meeting. Thank you very much for sparing your time today, being here.